Thank you. So let's take stock. Let's see where we're at. Last week, we started our journey into family stories in Tanakh, a journey that more often than not takes us into sad, complicated, what today would be called dysfunctional familial spaces. Um, because what can we do? We're human, and the stories that matter to us, the stories that mean something to us, are stories in which people are human as well. Which is why we're not going to leave the first man and woman and their idyllic moment of reunion of, oh, this time, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, but rather we will continue the story and see how things crumbled and how things became complicated. But the question we will carry with us into it wouldn't just be, I'll put it differently. The way we're looking at it is not just as readers interested in a juicy story, even though it is a juicy story. Love triangle, according to some Mefarshim, we'll get to that. But rather, I want to look at it as a living, practicing Jew. Meaning, what is this story teaching me for me today? What does this story mean? Why is this story important? Most thinkers from the Middle Ages, at least onwards, agree that we're not supposed to really understand the stories of Adam and Chava and Cain and Hevel as the one authoritative history of the universe exactly as it happened. There's something about these stories that is, they're chosen and they're showcased in a way that's meant to inspire us, to model something for us. And the question is, what do our first mother and father model for us when we not only, practice Judaism in the sense of doing the mitzvot, but build our own families, maintain our own relationships? And one last introduction before we delve into the text and into where we're at, I just want to remind us where we ended. We saw that there's this immense difference between Bereshit Aleph and Bereshit Bet. We saw how in Bereshit Aleph, there's not really a lot of room for relationships. Humanity doesn't really have a speaking role. It's just props in a perfect world. And how in Bereshit Bet, with its beginning that implies something complicated, something that is still behithavut, in the process of being created, we encounter humanity as actors in their own right in the grand drama of the creation of the world, as partners of God, and as people, at least man, is a person who goes through a series of experiences that help him come in touch or become aware of his own limitations, of the boundaries of what he can and can't do, can and can't achieve, and hopefully create what we called space for relationships. That space between me and the world in which I don't see the world as an extension of myself that I can take and use and abuse, but rather as something that stands outside myself and therefore something that I can enter into a relationship with. And into this world, the woman is created, man is enthused, he recognizes her, he sees her, he unites with her, he names her and renames himself in the process in a way that cleaves them onto each other, much as in future generation, a man and a woman will cleave onto each other and become one flesh. Physically, they cleave onto each other. Linguistically, Ish and Isha, instead of Adam, named after his origins, the Adamah. And we finished on the somewhat concerning note that Isha, at this point, did not go through any of those relationship training experiences, and that her creation in this way puts her structurally, like in essence, in an inferior position to man. Because just by virtue of being the first and being he for whom she is created as a helpmeet, he becomes the hero of the human story. She becomes his happy ending. I think I mentioned Joseph Campbell last time, did I? No? Joseph Campbell wrote about how all stories throughout time and space go through a certain recurring pattern. He called it the hero's journey or the monomyth. And it starts with a hero who's in some sort of status, you know, some sort of state of being that is how it is. And it's not always good, but it's the way it is. You know what it is. Then there's some sort of call for journey, to go out to a journey, call to adventure. You get a letter from Hogwarts. God talks to you from the burning bush. Mr. Bingley moves to the estate next door. Something changes your equilibrium. And then the hero has to choose to cleave onto his existence as it is, and then there's no story, or go out, take a risk, go into the unknown, and then go through a certain growth experience that Campbell really mapped out and showed how different stories, even if they seem very different on the surface, all check a certain set of boxes of growth experiences and adventures until the hero comes back and redeems the world or his corner of it. Now, when Campbell wrote it, he wrote it as if that's the only story. And he wrote about the role women play in the story. Some darker roles, like, you know, the dark temptress trying to make the young hero stray off his route. But he also talked about the positive role, the anima, the soul, for him is represented by women. Sorry. And the ultimate growth, or the ultimate indication of the growth of the hero, is when he is united with his anime, with his internal soul, through finding his true love. In other words, woman has a symbolic important role, but she's not the heroine of the story in her own right. And in fact, a lot of feminist criticism has been written on Campbell's system, saying this is all about stories of men. Where are the women in the story? What happens when the woman is a hero? And there's been a lot of work about unpacking stories where women go through life and showing that it's not the same. It's not, it's a very different kind of story. My point here is not to give introduction to feminist criticism of Campbell, even though I may have strayed a little bit too deep into that, I'm sorry. But rather to say that this criticism seems very apt here, because Adam fits the bill. He is the hero. He is the one going out of his comfort zone. He is the one struggling to grow. We talked about him being a hero of becoming, someone whose whole job is to grow and make the world bigger and better than what it is, bring the potential of the world into actualization and fruition. And then his prize is this perfect helpmate created just for him. And we, the ladies in the room, are supposed to nod silently and say, yes, that's our role. No. And into that tension, into that potential for dissatisfaction, into this potential for complexity, we step when we want to see what is the next chapter in the story. And I want to invite you to go to box number 6 and read together in the bottom of box number 6. It's on page 5, just to confuse us all. Judy Klitzner's observation on this moment in human history and in biblical story. In her original manifestation as Ha'adam, meaning in the first chapter, when male and female are created together as the two parts of Ha'adam, woman is fully half of the human creature who is master of the physical world, formed in God's image, and privy to his word. For a large portion of the second creation story, woman, who was formerly an essential, equal part of humanity, is entirely absent. She has no part in tending to the garden, and she is excluded from God's conversation. Unlike the fully enabled Ha'adam, again, Genesis 1, woman depicted in this chapter is derivative. She exists in relation to man. His loneliness leads to her creation. She is bone of his bones and flesh of his flesh, a helper corresponding to him, kenegdo. Even the seemingly idyllic description of the future union of males and females as becoming one flesh is phrased from the point of view of the male. Woman's perspective on this meeting is entirely absent. Is she as elated as men? Does she consider him to be her perfect complement? Her Ezer Kenegda. Isn't it a nice phrase, Ezer Kenegda? Woman's silence in this passage only intensifies these questions and affirms the male-centered lens of Genesis 2. And now, as we read what happens next, and passing to the next page, let's bear that in mind. Let's bear in mind that until now, all of the experience, all the lessons learned, all the wisdom accumulated through life itself is all on men's side. All the power of naming things, of communicating, of creating is in men's hand. Woman is here to be his helper, but we don't know yet what is that supposed to mean. And the very next thing we discover, and we will read it in a moment in box number 8, but I want to first elaborate a little bit, is that a moment, at least in literary terms, a moment after we hear about how they come together and they're naked and they're unashamed, Eve, sorry, I'm calling her Eve, even though she's not Eve at this point. The woman is alone in the garden. There's this moment when they're coming close, they're coming together, but then without any explanation, she's on her own. Now, I think anyone who's ever been in a relationship is well aware that we're not always together. That would be very distressing, frankly. I mean, we have to go about our lives. Imagine being attached in the hip and just never, ever separating and going about your day. But it's still the contrast, the drop kind of this description of union and closeness in which nudity leaves people unashamed because they're so close, and there's this sense of an extension of each other almost, to this moment of the woman standing alone in the garden being approached by the snake, leaves us a little bit shaken. There's a certain whiplash here, I think. And I think the literary whiplash is meant to raise questions for us. It's not just a, oversight on the part of Tanakh, of not giving us. One day men went to work and women stayed alone in the garden. And it's not that. It's not something that the editor struck out because, oh, that's boring. Let's just skip to the interesting part. It's not about that. There's something else here. And this something else cuts straight to the nature of distance, of space. Last week, we spoke about space as a positive thing. We spoke about how the space between man and reality, the space between man and woman, is the basis of our relationship of mutual respect, of true communion, of trust, of kindness, of responsibility. Because we said that as long as man sees other people as an extension or as something to consume of his self and not as subjects, meaning as human, as agents in their own right, there's no room for ethics or for relationships to evolve. But space is also dangerous because when there's space, there's room for interpretation, right? For example, he said, she said. When there's space, there's room for growing apart, for people stopping being torn towards each other and rather turning away from each other and walking away. There's room for neglect. I want to go back a little bit. I'm sorry, I know I'm driving you crazy back and forth, but let's go back again to box number 6. Rabbi Soloveitchik in Family Redeemed talks in glowing terms about the importance of our inability to fully penetrate each other's loneliness, to fully understand the other. He thinks that this otherness, the fact that when we look at the eyes of another human being, we know that we will never fully understand them, is exactly the foundation stone of that space that allows a true relationship to evolve. Let's read what he says. The uniqueness of men persona, meaning as opposed to men natura and Bereshit Aleph, where we don't have a personal individual identity. The uniqueness of man persona expresses itself in the mysterium magnum, the great mystery, which no one except God can penetrate. In order to escape loneliness, men absconditus, let's ignore their Latin, had to meet women mystery. They have a lot in common. However, they're also different. The I awareness in Adam is totally incomprehensible to Eve, and vice versa. Each of them has a secret which neither will ever betray. Men persona and women persona resemble each other and at the same time do not understand each other. She is Ezer Kenegdo. his helper and his opponent at the same time. For men and women differ not only psychologically as men and women, of whom the first account of creation tells us, but also spiritually and personality-wise. Because the woman is not the shadow of man, but an independent persona, because the woman projects a totally different existential image, her companionship helps man to liberate himself from his loneliness. In the interpersonalistic existential tension, I feel like I need a medal for this. Interpersonalistic existential tension, both men and women find redemption. I don't know if you recall, last time I told you the story about looking at my sister when we were little and being like, oh my God, she must have a voice in her head talking all the time also. And it was exactly that. It was that moment when she became mysterious to me. Until then, I just assumed I know everything there is to know about her. By becoming unknowable on some level, she became a human being I could relate to and have a relationship with. Not a marital relationship, thank God, but a relationship of any sorts. However, this very otherness means that men and women are not necessarily aligned, especially with the backdrop of all those differences between their experiences and her creation for his sake that might be playing a subconscious role in her life. We already know going in that this distance, the fact that she's now alone in the garden, is not just a physical fact. It's also a manifestation of the fact that at the end of the day, the very differences that came from their creation processes mean that on some level, they're still alone. She's still alone and he's still alone because they're not on the same page. And the level to which you're not on the same page becomes clear in the pshat in a moment. Let's go again, sorry, to box 8 and read the text there. Box 8, Bereshit Gimel. Now, the serpent was the shrewdest, Arum, of all the wild beasts the Lord God had made. Before we go ahead, I want to pause already here in mid-verse and note that in terms of storytelling, what's happening here, just from a storytelling analysis, is fascinating because we're changing points of view. Meaning until now we followed Adam and Eve, or Ish ve'isha, very closely, right? We watched Ish going through all these experiences. We watched him meet the woman. The speaking parts were Ish and God. And kind of the story, if it would have continued naturally, would tell us what happens next from Ish's perspective or from God's perspective. Instead, we're not even following Isha's perspective. Rather, we are suddenly hearing about the snake. A new actor goes onto the stage. And the snake does the following. He said to the woman, "Did God really say, you shall not eat of any tree of the garden?" Now, I have to say that in Hebrew, what it says is, "Af ki amar Elokim lo tochlu mikol etz hagan." It could be understood as a question or as the beginning of a sentence. Even though God said, one way or another, woman interjects. The woman replied to the serpent. And I want to point out that this is the first time we hear her voice in human history. "We may eat of the fruit of the other trees of the garden. It is only about fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden that God said, you shall not eat of it or touch it lest you die." So the woman corrects him. This is, by the way, a classic negotiation tactic the snake is applying here, right? He's not telling her, you should really eat from this fruit. He's not starting by attacking what she believes to be the right thing to do. He starts by inviting her to give her interpretation so he can then engage with it. And when she gives her interpretation, we right away see that there's a discrepancy because God never said, don't touch the fruit. Now, the text doesn't tell us, right? The text doesn't tell us anything about why she says it. There's a famous Rashi, I didn't bring the text, but there's a famous Rashi that suggests that she added it, like she exaggerated. In trying to explain to the snake how serious it is, she exaggerated, and Rashi says about it, "Kol hamosif goreah," Whoever adds something really detracts, because then, according to the Midrash, the snake pushed her against the tree. She touched the fruit. She didn't die. And he said, see? And now that you already grouped together touching and speaking, she kind of said, oh, I guess it's not as big a deal as I thought. The truth is, though, that there's another potential or possible interpretation, right? That Adam misspoke, that Adam exaggerated. Now, it's a little bit speculative, but let's put ourselves in Adam-ish shoes, sandals, barefoot, whatever. They're everything. He already has a working relationship with God, right? He went from a world where there was no Eden to a world with Eden, to a world without animals, to a world with animals, to a world without the woman, to a world with woman. It wouldn't be surprising if you have a somewhat paternalistic attitude. I know what's going on. I know the ropes. You're here. You just were created. You're a baby in existential terms. Let me make it easier for you. Instead of just telling you, don't eat the fruit, don't even touch it, just you stay away. Sometimes we say things like that to little kids, right? When my kids were little, I didn't just tell them, don't touch the stovetop. I told them, don't come near the stovetop, right? And I have to tell you, I regretted it because they did the exact same thing. They walked next to it, saw that it's fine, and then touched it. So you'd think as a reader of Bereshit, I would have learned my lesson, but no. The point, yeah. Mhm.
Common tactic in Judaism in mitzvot, it's a fence around the Torah. So instead of just saying don't eat, it's a fence to keep you from eating. Don't even get near it.
Correct.
And it's something that we do as a matter of course.
Correct. So I'll repeat for the Zoom. You're saying that in Judaism we do it all the time. We have the idea of gader, right? Muktzeh. We do siyag la Torah. I think the difference is that there we do it consciously, carefully, and that it is halachically a different status. Meaning a lot of halacha, and I'm not a halacha person, but that's not my, I practice it, but I don't do it. Or I try to, but I'm not a halacha scholar, so I'm not going to pretend to know more than I do. But my best understanding is that if you violate a siyag, and if you violate the thing, the punishment, the definition of it is very, very different. And in this way, we maintain in our mind the awareness that this is something we do out of respect to the mitzvah, to be more careful with it, but we're not telling ourselves, no, it's the same status, it's the same level. That's, I think, the problem here. The ambiguity, though, I really want to pause on the ambiguity here, because ambiguity is the key, I think. The key to the whole story is ambiguity. We don't know if it's Chava, sorry, I keep calling her Chava, Isha, who's making the mistake here, who's exaggerating, or if it's Adam, Ish, who's exaggerating. And the fact we don't know already tells us that there's a lot in this relationship that's not open to our view, that we see only parts of it. This story is calling to us, is reminding us, is inviting us to note the holes in it. And we'll come back to the question of why later. For now, let us continue. And Pasuk Dalet 4. And the serpent said to the woman, you are not going to die. But God knows that as soon as you eat of it, your eyes will be open, and you'll be like divine beings who know good and bad. The serpent is implying quite a lot in this one pasuk, right? First of all, it's implying that God lied, that it's not really going to lead to death, which immediately, especially if, as the Midrash says, he pushed her against the tree and she saw that she really didn't die and it got her all confused. By calling God's veracity into question, the serpent is inviting the woman to think of God not as a law, not as, something you can't cross, but rather as yet another being you're in a relationship with. And in a relationship, like in any relationship, there's white lies, manipulations, there's things you say, things you don't say, things you intend and things you don't intend. There's he said, she said. It's like he's bringing God to the level of humanity, in a sense, in her mind. Once again, leading us to note the issue of space. the space between members of our relationship. Now she's looking at that space between herself and God and thinking, wait a minute, does God really have my best intention at heart? When God says something, does it mean exactly what he says, or is he saying something to get me to do something or not do something, even if it's not a correct representation of reality? It introduces space between her and God in a negative way. And into this space, he comes with his alternative interpretation. God didn't tell it to you to protect you from death. God told it to you because he wants to keep his exclusivity as God. You have the ability, mamash here, within reach, to make yourself godlike, to raise yourself in some significant way. Not, grow a little bit in stature or girth or something physical. You can transform yourself. And here is where the lure, where the hook is so brilliant. Because how did we start Perek Bet of Bereshit? How did we start the second creation story? With the awareness that man or humanity is meant to be that which becomes and changes itself and the environment, right? We said that there was no greenery because man wasn't created yet and didn't till the soil. So it's in our DNA, in our existential, metaphysical DNA, to want to be more, to do more, to do more, to be more, to create more, to change the world into a better place. And Nachash is speaking exactly to this innate desire. He's speaking to something that is good about humanity, that desire to do and change and add and grow. But he is leading her astray through it. And it's especially powerful, especially, or lands especially well, or on fertile ground, so to speak, in Eve, if we once again recall what Judy Klitzner pointed out about her inferiority. She is created into a world where she is inferior by definition. How alluring to think that she, through the simple act of biting into a piece of fruit that apparently she can touch without dying, can pull herself up from this inferior position, not only to Adam's level, but to God's level. Let's read Judy Klitzner here below in the same box, just the next source. The creation account in Genesis 2 has two components, hierarchy and emotional closeness. It seems from man's song of exultation at woman's birth that despite the inequality between them, he is content with both aspects of their relationship. It remains to be seen whether woman, who has not yet spoken, is as satisfied as man with this uneven status quo. I'd like to invite you to think back to Campbell and the idea of a hero's journey. If you are at Eve, let's put ourselves in her feet. Your status quo, the world as you know it, the Darsley's home or the Shire or living in Midian with your father-in-law, if you're Moses, like the world before the call for you, if you're Eve, is a world where you have an intimate relationship and you're inferior and information comes to you from Adam, not from your own experience or your own conversation with God. He is the source of all information and you're dependent on him. This is your reality. This is familiar. And now someone comes in and tells you, you can be more than that. This is the classic call for adventure. It's like Hero's Journey 101. This is it. This is the thing that a hero is supposed to listen and not reject, not refuse, but rather grab with two hands and go out into the bigger white world. This is what she does. She follows that innate psychological urge, which is so innate that it's expressed in so many stories throughout history and throughout geography. This innate desire to say, we can be more than our beginning position, than our comfort zone. We can be more. And she takes the fruit and she grasps for something more than that. And I'll read those psukim because I cut it in the middle. Pasuk Vav, right above the Judy Klitzner. When the woman saw that the tree was good for eating and a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable as a source of wisdom, She took of its fruit and ate. She also gave some to her husband, and he ate. Yes.
If the point of her getting this knowledge is to move out of her inferior position and to become either equal or superior, why would she then feed it to man?
I think that it's a good question. I'll repeat the question. You're saying, why is she sharing it with men? If the point is to gain superiority, I think, of inequality, I think that the point here is less about beating men in some way. It's not about being better than him. It's about regaining existentially her equal status, which she had, in the previous iteration. Like, okay, I'm sorry, I have to go back a little bit. There are some interpreters who think that the two creation stories are chronological, meaning their world was created and then for some reason was recreated. But most commentators don't see it like that. They think that Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 represent two aspects of our experience of the world, or what the world is, as part of it, a natural part of it, and as moral agents with free choice who interact with it in some different way in Genesis 2. So if we accept that, it means that woman in her creation has some part of her that is equal to man. She has some sense in which they're both just part of the same species. They're the man and the woman, they're the male and the female of the same species. And according to Judy Klitzner, if I had brought the longer part, but I didn't because I didn't want to print a whole Megillah for you, I highly recommend reading it in the original. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. According to Judy Klitzner, her desire isn't to defeat man or take over him. She wants to regain that equal share, like that sense that we're the same. So by giving him the fruit, she's not raising him above herself. She's saying we're both going to transcend together the world as we knew it. The being, the reality we inhabited before we're going to outgrow it together. Does that answer the question to some extent? That's her interpretation, at any rate. I think personally that just like Adam is complicated and has moments of tenderness, but then later will throw Eve under the bus and tell God it's all her fault, she's also complicated. She's a complicated character. And in one moment, maybe she wants something for herself, a certain knowledge, a certain superiority, a certain sense of agency. But she also experienced that tenderness, that union, right, in the previous chapter, at the end of the previous chapter. So maybe after experiencing this jolt of ability, of superiority, of being something bigger, maybe she also says, wait, but I do want him with me in it. So I don't think we need to reduce her to one desire. That's what I'm trying to say. She, like all of us, is motivated by a complex array of possible things. By the way, Milton, the Christian author, the Christian English author, in his retelling of the story of Eden, which is extremely Christian, and I'm not going to go into it, he has one bit that I find very evocative, in which he tries to answer the question, did Adam know what he's eating? Right? Because the text here doesn't refer to it at all. Did the Isha just give it to him without telling him what it is and just force on him the knowledge of good and evil and everything that came after? Some Christian interpreters say yes and blame her for everything wholeheartedly. Some say she offered him the option to join her at the top, so to speak. Milton says he knew and he ate it anyway, not out of a desire of knowledge or power, but rather to be with her, because he realized if she's going to be exiled, if she's going to somehow be punished, he didn't want her to be punished without him. How does Milton square it with Adam's later words about Chava? I don't know. Let's leave it at that. I just think it's a very interesting, thought-provoking way to look at it. Yes.
Isha and Tanakh. It's troubling because she didn't recognize, as far as we know, she didn't have a conversation with God.
Correct.
Ever.
Correct.
And he said that Adam was the shliach to go through what you can and can't do. Now suddenly she's paying attention to an animal. whatever the nachash is, we don't know, we do know, but she's talking to an animal. She's not talking to her husband and she's not talking to God. So that space of irreality is very troubling for the reader. If we don't go further, we don't dig a little deeper. We don't have conversations with animals.
Most of us.
Yeah. Don't expect a response back. But there's so much to be said about where she was in her infant development. She was an infant at the time.
So, yeah, so this is an excellent question. You're saying that there's something really bizarre. And I mean, like, we're so used to this story that sometimes we don't even notice it, but who talks to animals? More than that, Adam got his information from God, right? Why is she not talking to God about it or to Adam about it? Why is she taking advice from a snake? Now, of course, we have to do some suspension of this belief and understand that the relationship between man and animals at this time is different than ours. Especially when you consider that in the previous chapter, we saw how man named the animals, and there's a serious quest for looking for a helpmeet. Now, I mean, it seems as if the quest was meant to fail, but man doesn't necessarily know that. Meaning, like, man is set to name the animals and search with God hovering over his shoulder, so to speak, a helpmeet amongst them. And then when he can't, woman is created, which means that perhaps the animals in this story, the animals in this pre-exile from Eden reality weren't as distant from us as the animals we see in the world around us. Now, I would say more than that. If you think back to Genesis 1, there it's even closer, because even though we're created in the image of God, and that's the thing that separates us, we're created in exactly the same way as the animals. The language that's used to describe our creation, and again, in Genesis 1, language is the tool of creation, is the same. We're created from the earth, like we're created in a very similar mechanism in the image of God, and that does set us apart. But it's all, and God even says, I didn't bring the text here, but when he talks to us in the end of Genesis 1, and it's very much at us because we're not expected to respond. It's not a conversation. God informs us that he gives us and the animals permission to eat all the greenery of the world. Like there's like this sense of like, we're part of the same circle of life in Lion King terms. Yes. So I think that we need to understand that at this stage, the distance between the animal kingdom and humanity is a little less sharp. Of course, though, most interpreters see the snake as unusual, not as a normal animal, but as an animal that's somehow different, that's somehow other. I didn't mean to go into it. But I will refer to it briefly. Manitou, Rav Yehuda Ashkenazi, Zichrono Livracha, the French Jewish philosopher, and in the school that Rav Shagar later came from, that school of thought, which again, I'm not an expert on, but he is very comprehensive interpretation of Bereshit, particularly of these stories, the stories of creation, the foundational stories of humanity. He has also a lot of other beautiful interpretations that are in French, so totally inaccessible to me, I'm afraid. But his book on Bereshit is published in Hebrew. And he says that the thing that kind of meyached is special about the snake is that it's an animal that wants something more. Kind of like us, like the humanity of Genesis 2, the snake too wants more than it has. It's not the animals of Genesis 1 who are set in their course and happily go about to procreate in the way they're intended to. No, the snake represents some sort of animalistic desire to grow. And Rav Manitou, following some Kabbalah stories and Midrashim, casts snake almost as part of a love triangle between Adam and the woman and the snake. And there's a whole midrash that says that, and it has to do with smichut, right? Stories that come together, because the end of the previous chapter is that Adam knows his wife in the biblical sense. And then it starts with a snake. More than that, the end of the previous chapter is about how Adam, Ish v'Isha were naked, arumim, and then we move to the snake who is arum in a different sense, right? In the sense that he is has a shrewd and guile. He's shrewd and has guile. So according to that, the snake wants to form some sort of covenantal relationship with a woman. He wants to tear her apart from the man and become part of the story of humanity through her, become part of this story of something greater and bigger. And perhaps this is why, and here I'm offering my own interpretation a little bit and following Rav Mani too. So don't, I mean, I'm saying if I'm wrong, it's me, it's not him. Perhaps that is why what he says is so appealing to the woman, because the woman here seems like she wants more, right? She wants to be more. Whether or not we accept Judy Klitzner's interpretation, she clearly is tempted by the idea that she will be like a divine being in some way. So maybe that's the snake and her have a similar desire. They both want to be more than they are. And he can speak to her from that affinity, from that place of, I too am not particularly happy with my lot or my part within the realm of existence. You and I together can aspire for something more. Of course, in the snake's case, there's also a destructive element, right? Because at no point does the woman say, oh, okay, and then I'll marry you, or I'll leave. Like she goes and gives the fruits to Adam. So it's almost like he's pushing her into something bad, almost as if to see what happens. And it's not clear that he has an immediate benefit from it, which is, by the way, why in a liturgy and later traditions, we liken to the snake people who are, causing harm for harm's sake. Like it's not for profit, not because there's some obvious, just to cause trouble. I hope that speaks a little to your question. Yes.
But Judy Klitzner, in the art salon, aren't we projecting modern thought, the woman's modern thought, a little bit too much on the development of Adam and Chava? It seems to me,
Mhm.
how was she long? What was her thinking process at that time? She probably maybe she didn't realize that she was submissive. It seems to me we're projecting a lot.
So, okay, so this is an important question. And it's a question that is very controversial in the sense that, like, I can tell you where I stand on this, but every person you'll ask stands somewhere else on this. So I want to unpack it though and divide. You're asking, aren't we projecting anachronistically onto Eve things that we're experiencing in the modern day and age or seeing in the modern day and age? First of all, it's a fair question. And there's always a risk in interpretation of doing that. And we need to check ourselves. But I think there are two layers to this. The first is that the stories specifically in the first chapters of Genesis are ahistorical, meaning they're not stories that are located in a time and space that exists in our reality. When we get already to the Avot, it's already, I don't know, it's not historical necessarily in the same way everybody means historical, but it's within a historical moment in time. It was a time that it's described. Even already in Noach, it's still very hard to parse, but the idea of the creation of cities and creation of civilization, the creation of civilizations, we have some history of that. We know it's true that at the same time that we placed the Mabul, cities started emerging around Mesopotamia. So we can talk about the historicity of the perspective of the characters and what would people in that moment in history be likely to think or feel and start applying these tools. These stories are archetypical. They exist almost above time because they exist in a space that is no longer accessible to us. And in that regard, they invite interpretation. You could say, and again, I realize that I'm walking on a very controversial line here, so I'm trying to be very careful. You could say, forget what people felt in Eden. What did people feel at the time the Torah was given? Was it likely for people at the time, because Torah dibra b'lashon bnei Adam, right? The Torah is given to us in a way that we can understand it. So at the time the Torah is given, the generation of the Exodus, right? Then was it likely for women to feel that they're submissive or inferior and want more? I think that's a better question in a sense. It's more the people who received the Torah. Does that make sense? The people who received the Torah, how did that land to them? And I think that then the answer is yes, it was something that they experienced. Because think about Miriam. We have Miriam in Parashat Be'alotcha saying it's not right that Moshe separated from his wife, right? And it's not as if God only speaks to him, he also speaks to me. And then God puts her in her place. And it's a very difficult story, and I don't want to go into it too much, but we see in it a woman who feels, wait, what is my space in the world? Meaning the question is not alien for that generation. So does that mean that Judy Klitzner and I are correct in our interpretation? Not at all, not necessarily. Because if it could be, we are, right? A man sees from the what's on their mind. So it could be that it's on our mind and we're projecting it. But I don't think that it's anachronistic necessarily. I hope that was a okay answer. Mhm.
Recreated.
Correct.
It's a tremendous development from Adam to a couple of Torah.
Correct. I agree. And it's just that we don't have a way to really penetrate all the way to Eden and say what was likely to be in our heart. All we know is what the Pshat and the Torah Sheba'al Peh give us. And within the Pshat, I think there is room for this interpretation, especially because of the gap that's created very intentionally between Bereshit Aleph, Bereshit Bet. Any more? I have time for one more questions before we continue. Yes. But isn't about what? You're asking if there's a way to read the text that isn't about power dynamics? Absolutely. That isn't about power dynamics. Power dynamics. They're meaning you can read it and focus on knowledge, for example, right? You can focus on the idea that knowledge is what she desires. And Rav Soloveitchik, by the way, that's more his reading. He thinks the way he reads, and again, we can't go into everything because you really need to read pasuk and like analyze every word. But Rav Soloveitchik thinks that man, the way man is described in Bereshit Aleph and Bet, is power hungry. Like power is something man wants. He doesn't think woman is. He thinks woman desires knowledge and inspiration, creativity, like not power. According to Rav Soloveitchik's reading of this parak, I'm not saying you, me, don't want power. I'm saying according to Rav Soloveitchik's reading of this parak, women and men desire different things. And he has a whole way of showing how that's the case. I'm sharing with you what I find compelling, not because I particularly view the world in general through power dynamics. I'm very much not a Marxist, but just a moment. But I think that here it's hard not to see it. To me, it's hard not to see the power because forget her inferiority vis-a-vis Adam. Forget that part. What Nachash is offering her is to be like God. And that is something, it has to do with power. Rav Soloveitchik thinks it has to do with creative power because later we see that she gives birth and she's happy with it and she's excited about it. So he said, oh, this is what she wanted all the time. It was the creative power that God represents, not power of dominion. But yeah, I hope that addresses it somewhat. Yeah, one last comment and then we have to keep going.
That she was probably upset when the Nachash offered her stuff and said things. You know, Adam did not share things with her. And therefore she said, I'm gonna share this apple, whatever it was, with him. So I think it was a matter of maybe I'll show him up and say, see, I can share with you why aren't you sharing God and everything else with me?
It's interesting. You're suggesting, and I'm repeating it for the Zoom, that maybe in sharing the fruit with Adam, the woman is rebuking him on some level. She's saying, you didn't share God's words with me. I am sharing something with you. Why can't you be more like that? But the truth is, remember when I said that there's a lot of gaps in the story? We don't know what went down. It could be he shared a lot with her. It could be lahefech, she's paying him back. He shared things with her, and now she is happy to be in the position not just of the receiver, but of the giver. You can read it in a lot of different ways. And I think this is the genius of this story. It's such a powerful, evocative story. Here we are together. And I think all the questions and the unease are a mark of that, that there's something so undetermined in the story. There's so many things that are unsaid, but they're inviting us to try and see ourselves. They're inviting us to try and understand how this reflects on us. And I want to continue from that point of trying to understand where these people are coming from and actually go back a second. I didn't bring the text. I'm just telling you. There's a midrash about the beginning of this parak, right? The moment when that says, where is Adam? Right? That's the question we started with. Where is he? A second ago, they were together, coming together physically and emotionally and metaphysically in the garden, unashamed of their nudity in each other. Where is he? What happened? And the midrash is kind of funny to me. It says two options. One, after they came together, he fell asleep. And the other, he went to work. God said, you need to le'ovda u'leshamra. So God said, hello, work day, come along. I need to show you what your jobs are, Mr. Custodian of the universe. Now, why do I find this a very important midrash? Because this midrash, if you think about it, represents the two things that draw us away from our significant others. Sleep, but sleep is not just sleep. Sleep means retreating into our own solipsistic world, into our internal world where no one else has entry, right? This is what it is. Sleep is you go into your own world, and unless you believe in all kinds of crazy movies that say you can invade other people's dreams, you're in your private existence. You're in your own private world. Or work. What does work represent? Work represents us pursuing the goals of our life, pursuing the things, our ambitions, using our talents. Some people work with their spouses. I know couples who have a business, they run together. Most of us don't. Most of us, when we go about the business of life, we, by necessity, draw ourselves away from our significant other into a sphere that is our own. We can share it, we can showcase it, we can talk about it over dinner, but it's our own. And this is the tension in which all relationships exist. And this is why I think it's a foundational story for all the stories. Like, we'll keep coming back to it. Just a moment. We'll keep coming back to it because it's a foundational story for every relationship story in Tanakh and I think in life. Namely, our relationship requires distance and space so that we respect each other as separate. But at the same time, it exists in a space that can enable distance and estrangement and misunderstandings to evolve. Yes. I can't, can you?
Yeah, cyber and maybe probably whether that's the power dynamic. I think the way how God responds is very passive when to close them after they discover it. And with that, midrash that you just brought up, concept of the distance between man and woman, I'm curious, his punishments don't really seem to be a tikkun for that. You know, it's Adam going to a field, be separate, and women have childbirth, which is its own world, its own, like usually, you know, is for a lot of different dynamics that creates difference. So I'm curious.
It's an excellent question, and that it perfectly leads us to where we want to go. So I'm just going to repeat it in my own words, if you don't mind. You're saying that in light of this reading of what's happening here, the tension of distance as a positive or negative thing, God's punishment suddenly appears much more like an act of compassion or chesed, or like it interacts with where they're at, because he is in a sense giving them separate spheres, right? Now man is going to till the soil, she's going to be busy with childbearing. How does that relate to their mistakes. So this leads us perfectly to the next part. So let's read at the bottom, and I'll answer it slowly as we go. Let's read the bottom of box 8, okay? Then the eyes of both of them, so 7, I'm sorry, no, 8, yes. Box 8. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they perceived that they were naked, and they sewed together fig leaves and made themselves loincloths. They heard the sound of the Lord God moving about in the garden at the breezy time of day. And the man and his wife hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. The Lord God called out to the man and said to him, "Where are you, Ayeka?" He replied, "I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." Then he asked, "Who told you that you were naked? Did you eat of the tree from which I have forbidden you to eat?" I want to pause here for a second. There are 2 moments in which God gives Adam an opportunity to come clean, right? First, when he says Ayeka, and we already know from other places that this question is not just like technical, oh, where are you right now, this instant happened to be, this row, this line, you know? Adam could say, "I'm sorry, I am in a place of confusion. I'm sorry, I am in a place of having made a mistake." And then he asks him directly, "Did you eat from the fruit?" The correct answer is yes. But he doesn't say that. Instead, he says, the man said, "The woman you put at my side, she gave me of the tree and I ate." And the Lord God said to the woman, "What is this you have done?" The woman replied, "The serpent duped me and I ate." There's only one other passage in Tanakh that I know that so succinctly and beautifully captures a person trying to escape themselves. And that is Jonah. In the beginning of Jonah, we see in a succession of very short few psukim that he goes from milifnei Hashem, from his standing before God. He goes to sea. He goes yored leyam, yored leyafo, right? Goes down to Yafo, goes down to the boat, goes down to his room, goes into sleep. And until the sailors literally wake him up and force him to engage with them, he is resigning himself from reality in some deep level. He just pulling into that private space, right? We talk about the private space that pulls us away from people and the workspace. He's pulling into that private space of sleep to the point that Rabbanit Aviva Zornberg says that it's later seems, when you look back after he tells the sailors to throw him to the water, you kind of look back at his journey, you're like, oh, he's going to die. This whole journey is a journey into death, in a sense, into inaction, unengagement, uninvolvement, unwalking around and doing things, into death, into a place of death. Here, it's not the same. They very much don't want to die, but it's the same kind of motion of retreat. First of all, they retreat from their own eyes and each other's by covering their clothes, themselves in leaves, right? Then they retreat into the bushes, into the trees, away from God's gaze. Then when God comes and forces his questions of them on them, they retreat from standing before him and accepting blame. They retreat into excuses. They try to hide, in a sense, they try to hide behind leaves, behind trees, and then behind each other or other beings, right? Eve is trying to hide behind the snake. And in a sense, that is the real failure. Perhaps eating the fruit was bad. I mean, we know it was bad. But God is telling them, we can start again. Like, I'm inviting you to come clean and accept your punishment and stand as my partners in this conversation. But they're not open for it. They are trying to create a distance now between themselves and God. We keep talking about distance between the two of them, but now they're trying to create a space between them and God. They don't want to stand in such closeness to God. And this is where a more compassionate interpretation of the punishment, as you suggested, really does come in. Because in a sense, God could have forced them. He could have made them stand there in his glare, right, in the awesome presence, and force them to keep talking and force them to own to their actions and force them to come to terms with it. But he's not. Instead, he's punishing them. But he's punishing them in a way that gives them a sense of security, a sense of safety. And I'll explain what I mean. And once again, I'm going back to Campbell. That's why I brought him, because he's very useful for that. Campbell says that the big distinction, the threshold the hero has to cross in the beginning of the story is from the familiar, safe space where you know who you are, you know what's expected of you. Sometimes it's really not good. It's not, you don't want to be there, but you know how to live there and how to exist there. And then, sorry. The threshold, the call for adventure comes, and you have to cross a threshold of some sort. You have to leave behind what's familiar and go into the unknown. Adam and the Ish and the Isha are not ready for this. He is giving them the opportunity. He is inviting them into an uncomfortable conversation, and they're not taking it. So instead of forcing them, instead of dragging them across the threshold into the dangers of a closer encounter with him, it's like, okay, I'm giving you now a sense of safety. You did not succeed at navigating the distance between you, the separate yet united spheres that create a couple. So I'm going to help you by defining the spheres for you, by defining the power dynamics, sorry, but it is there, between you. I will define it. You men are going to be responsible for tilling the soil, and it's going to be hard. You're going to, right? You're going to have to sweat and work, and you're going to have to really work at it, and it's going to consume your time. And you women are going to have the challenge of childbearing and child rearing, and it's not going to be easy. It's going to be difficult. It's going to tax you, to tax your body, to require a lot of your time, and that's going to consume your time. And the relationship between you is going to be, and here it's mamash explicit, a power relationship, where he says in box 9, and to the woman he said, I will make most severe your pangs in childbearing, in pain shall you bear children, yet your urge, chukah, desire, shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. I, God, am establishing a world now of clear patterns and rules. This is the world. You no longer have to navigate the tensions of figuring it out for yourself, of who are you together, who are you apart, what's the relationship between you. I am going to define it for you. And as Aviva Zorenberg says, here in the same box, the official history of desire begins here. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. With these words, God declares Eve's destiny, a melancholy sketch of the relation of power and desire. Desire is associated with vulnerability. To desire is to lose autonomy. The desired other acquires a sovereignty to which one surrenders in spite of the pain that inevitably ensues. If I wanted to depress you, I would stop here right now. But neither I nor Tanakh stops here, right? This is the first story, the first relationship, our first attempt at being a family, even though it's not, the word family only enters the story after Noach. It's our first attempt at becoming, for two to cleave unto each other and become one flesh. And it's complicated. And God says, we're not ready. Stay in the safe zone for now. I'm going to make it easier for you. I'm going to give you more rules, more arrangement, more, you're not ready to figure it out for yourself. But are we meant to understand from that that's it? Or are we meant to understand that this is our infancy and one day we'll grow up? Now, there are interpretations, and again, I'm referring to the Christian tradition, because in Christian tradition, that was very dominant in early Christian tradition, that say, no, this is how it's supposed to be forever. Eve, through her evil inclinations and activities, earned for herself a subservient position forever and ever. But there's a lot of thinkers in the Jewish traditions who treat it as a stage. And they even say, and Rav Yoni Grossman has this beautiful thought about it in his book on Genesis. He has a series of books on the Chumash of Genesis, and in the first one, he talks really about Parashat Bereshit and Parashat Noach. And he has this beautiful thought. And he says, think about adolescence. When you have adolescents at home, right, children, if you give them everything on a silver spoon, they're not going to develop as human beings. If you try and tell them, do this, do this, do this, and control everything about them, and they submit to it, they're not going to grow into functional, successful adults. In other words, our job, and I'm just starting that stage in my life, so I find it very challenging and relevant. Our job is to somehow set rules, but also expect that they will rebel against them, and then deal with it as the time goes. And to some extent, our job is to constantly navigate that odd space of trying to keep them in line, but also giving them enough room and enough rope to hang themselves at times to try, to fail, to succeed, to learn who they are, not with us dictating to them, not like little kids that we tell, now, this is the friend I approve for you, this is the whole guy approved for you. No, we need to give them room to discover themselves and somehow encourage it, which is the difficult part, I think. And in a sense, Rav Grossman suggests that what's happening in Eden is exactly that. God gave us rope to hang ourselves with. He put us in a position where we had to navigate a complicated stage with very minimal guidance, really very minimal. Don't eat from this fruit. Thank you. How do we talk to each other? He didn't tell them. He lets them try. And then when they prove that they're not quite ready for that stage, he says, okay, fine. I'll give you more rules. I'll give you more, but now they have a better sense of understanding why the rules are in place. And it's all an invitation for them to start discovering who they are and then to outgrow this stage. So the question we will carry from this story as we move into other family stories in Tanakh, and I'm telling you now already, just so it's not surprising, that we're not always going to be chronological, meaning we're not going to go like by the chronological order of the Chumashim. Sometimes we will jump ahead, sometimes we will jump back, because we will look for thematic connections and not just chronological continuity. But the question we will take with us from Adam and Chava, and that I hope will be our guiding light throughout this year, kind of the through line of the story, is how does this story, or I'll put it differently, how do the stories that come later continue and evolve out of this ground? How do the stories later, each story is a story of its own family, but it's also another stop in humanity's journey from this to the redeemed relationships that we all aspire to. And as we go on this journey, I want us to carry one last thought with us. And with that, I'm going to let you go for today. Christopher Booker, who I brought in box 10, and I'm not going to read the source, also in the tradition of Campbell, writes about how stories have certain recurring themes, recurring plot lines in them. Talks about a subgenre of stories that he calls the coming of age stories. Think Jane Eyre, for example, or David Copperfield, okay? It's a story that starts with a young hero who's in some sort of disadvantaged environment, but by the end of the story is a very actualized adult, admired, respected, and successful. And he points out that this story, which by the way is very popular in fairy tales, think Cinderella, think Aladdin, this story almost always has a crisis in the middle, because the story starts by the hero who's like good at heart, but disadvantaged, getting a chance at something better, starting to get a better life. Think Jane Eyre taken to Mr. Rochester's house and being offered the position of his wife, right? Think, I don't remember David Copperfield so well, so I'm not going to fake it. Think Cinderella going to the ball. Think Aladdin becoming like a prince through the genie's involvement and having the princess fall in love with him. And in the original legend, marry him, actually at this stage already. But if that was all the story was about, it would have been superficial and fake, because until that point, the hero didn't earn that new existence. It's stuff that were given to them by other people, by a fairy godmother, by a genie in a bottle, by a rich and mysterious benefactor with his own mysterious agenda and Jane Eyre. In order for it to be a true story that represents something that satisfies us and our innate desire to see people grow, the hero or heroine have to earn their happy ending. And that's why coming of age stories, says Booker, there's a crisis in the middle when everything goes awry. Jane Rochester is revealed to be already married, and Jane Eyre has to run away poor and with nothing into the wilderness. The magic wears off and Cinderella has nothing and is locked in an attic by her evil stepmother. Aladdin, Jafar steals everything from him in the Disney version. Let's leave it at that. I'm not going to go into Alif Laila Velaila. And it's then that the hero has to prove their mettle and re-earn that position, but from a place of effort. Eden was a gift to us. The rest of the history and the rest of the stories we will explore together is us trying to re-earn through our own efforts, a happy union under the sun. Yes?
My very special Tanakh teacher, Ayala Levy, taught us in college that after you do all the exegetical work, she said, what is the bracha that you give couples under the chuppah? That you as an individual couple can reach the Gan Eden status.
Exactly. That we in our private dealings, our bracha under the chuppah, as you say, is that we'll rejoice like God made us rejoice in Eden, but this time we have to earn it through our hard work. And next week we will start seeing how humanity goes or doesn't go about it. Thank you very much. Wonderful to see you.